This began quite simply by kind of chucking the sounds of healthy reefs at an AI model alongside those from degraded reefs. And we found that this model could actually do a pretty good job at identifying the difference between these. So if we gave it new recordings from a reef it hadn't heard before, it could tell whether this came from a healthy or a degraded reef.
This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, Pasha, the director and curator at TEDxLondon and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
Ben, you know what we get to do today?
Do I know what we get to do today? I feel like I have a good idea, but are you going to
I'm going to say we get to do something that is one of my favourite things to do. You're like, what is it?
Yeah, what is it? Is it garden? Is it?
No, we have to come back to your garden.
Yeah, we'll come back
to your garden. It's that we get to actually talk to one of our TEDxLondon speakers.
Ooh,
and the
exciting.
reason this makes me happy, because you don't actually know why this makes me happy, you're just being generous.
Yeah. It's not that exciting.
When you all get to listen to one of the amazing speakers at TEDxLondon, it's like the 12-minute highlights. Mm-hmm. You know, it's tight.
Refined. Yeah.
But behind the scenes, there's so much conversation and so much depth of knowledge and so many things that we just don't get to talk about on stage. And so we get to do that here. So that's why I'm excited.
We're going to unpack it. We're going to explore it, get into the nuts and bolts of it,
the
meat and potatoes.
So we are joined today by the wonderful Ben Williams. He is a marine biologist and data scientist, and is completing a PhD at the University College London and the Zoological Society of London, which I always have to pause and say properly.
Zoological is a difficult word. Yeah.
He's on a mission to protect our natural world using the power of AI, which we all know because we've all watched his talk. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I was there.
I was there.
Yeah, I was there. I remember.
So we're going to get into it, but broadly, Ben's work focuses on using AI to study the soundscape of coral reefs to support conservation and restoration. And he collaborates on one of the world's largest reef restoration programs, which is led by Mars Sheba. It's called the Mars Sheba Hope Grows campaign. And those are the chocolate bar and cat food.
Oh, is it actually?
Dudes, yes. And he also works with Google DeepMind, which is very cool. We're going to get into all of this. Let's get into it. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming, guys.
How are you feeling after your talk? That's the first biggest question.
That's a good question. I guess a lot of speakers would probably describe it as relieved, I think.
Yeah.
I've never practiced something so much in my life that I've been ready to just never touch again.
Yeah.
It was an amazing day. It was fantastic. I was really grateful to the team for the day as well. And now it's come out, all the support from friends and strangers online has been really heartwarming. So feeling great about it.
Brilliant. For those of you, the very few out there who have not watched your talk, can you just give us 1 line, 2 lines on it?
I guess in a line or two, my talk is all about showing how we can use AI to tackle challenges that matter for our environment by sharing the work I've been doing, which is working with coral reefs and listening to these habitats. So how we've been taking this tool and turning it to something you would never expect it could be helping us with. So that's probably a talk in a nutshell. But
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject here, but can we take a step back? Because I don't necessarily understand how coral reefs are linked to climate. Like, obviously they're part of climate, right? Like they are in the ocean, but like what role do they play? What impact do they have?
Yeah, totally. So coral reefs, like any habitat, they're of course being impacted by climate change, and they're part of this giant biosphere that we live on. But they are perhaps the most threatened ocean habitat that we have. So bit of doom and gloom, but we'll get it out of the way at the start, I guess.
Right.
So you've probably heard about things like coral bleaching, where the ocean water gets too warm. That causes corals to bleach. They go this ghostly white. A bit of a science behind that is that they have this symbiotic algae inside them. And when the temperature gets too hot, they're expelled. But they provide corals with loads of their energy from photosynthesis.
Right.
So without them, after a few weeks, the corals will die. And we're seeing this happen across the world at larger scales as climate change intensifies. So that's where climate change and coral reefs are linked. And there's loads of other threats that are coming about because of climate change as well, like rising sea levels and increasing intensity and frequency of storms. So it's this pretty enormous existential threat for coral reefs at the moment.
And is coral, is it a plant or is it a rock? Like, what's the...
Yeah,
Sorry, that might be a stupid question, but I don't know.
No, it's not at all.
I just know not to touch them. That's what I've been taught about.
Yeah.
Stay away. Yeah, as much as possible.
You're right on both counts.
Okay,
so, well, I suppose
I love
not,
it when I'm right
not
on both
so...
counts.
They're kind of plant, animal, and rock. So the core thing is they're like this coral animal, the polyp, that is super simple. It's basically got a stomach and some tentacles, and it pulls food in. And then they secrete this skeleton. So that produces the reefs that we see. So these enormous structures that, the whole Great Barrier Reef is built by these organisms. Mm-hmm. And then inside them, they have this algae. So that's what gives them the color.
That's the plant.
Yeah, that's the plant component. So that also provides some energy by photosynthesis. Mm-hmm. And so they're kind of this brilliant combination of the two. So you've got rock, plant, and animal all in the mix there.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I love this idea that they like expel you said the skeleton? That's bizarre. It's incredible. So in your talk, one of the ways that you talk about coral reefs that I love is you call them the rainforests of the ocean. And obviously the rainforests are super important for us on land in terms of oxygen and in terms of being a carbon sink and stuff. I'm assuming that coral reefs have this function in the sea around being like incredibly important for biodiversity and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of technical term we use is the ecosystem services that these habitats provide. And so just some of the numbers are 25%, probably a bit more, of all marine biodiversity can be found on coral reefs.
No way.
And when you look at the
seriously,
yeah, it's enormous. And when you get on a reef, it's overstimulating the amount of animal life and plants and things you're seeing here. And that's in this tiny area of the ocean as well. So it's less than 0.1% of the ocean floor is coral reef, probably much less, but it really punches above its weight in the biodiversity. And so all that life, all this kind of ecological processes that are happening here, they provide all these services to millions of people. So it's nearly 500 million with a B people around the world are directly reliant on coral reefs for some kind of service. So that could be coastal protection from things like storms. So we see it in places where reefs have been lost or damaged. Those communities are going to be far more impacted by storm damage when it rolls through. Or things like micronutrients and a protein source. So particularly for childhood development in a lot of these countries, their primary micronutrients for many of those that they need come from the fisheries that are available on these reefs. And then things like tourism in many economies, that's, done in the right way, can be a really great way to generate income for them in a sustainable way. So there's all these kinds of services that we get from these habitats that really matter.
You know why I find this so interesting? Yeah, because based on your accent, my assumption is that you didn't grow up near a coral reef. I might be very wrong.
I think we've got a Sherlock Holmes over here.
Yeah. So how does a person become like so interested and so invested in like what led you to?
Yes.
Why do you care?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I don't even know myself sometimes. But I guess it's probably a cliche answer is I was amazed by the natural world growing up. So yeah, grew up watching all these documentaries about the natural world. And I also grew up kind of relating to that Greta Thunberg energy, of we have this crisis that we're not doing anything about. And so I wanted to be able to contribute in that space. That led to me, going the academic route, studied biology as an undergrad. I had some amazing lecturers there. One of them, a long-term mentor, Steve Simpson, who was working on coral reefs. He's been on Blue Planet and lots of amazing things.
Shout out, Steve.
Shout out, Steve, definitely. It just kind of came about through that route. They're like this hyper-diverse ecosystem that to me is as close as we can get to an alien planet on the one where we live. So it was this fascination and realizing how important but how threatened these habitats are. That's how it came about for myself.
Incredible. And I think one of the things that was so interesting as we hear more about your work and in the talk is that you layer all these things on top of this work. So you're not just a marine biologist looking at coral reefs, but you're looking at the soundscape of a coral reef. And then we're going to also talk about AI. So before we get to the AI, we're going to build, right? So now we're going to talk about the idea
one
of
step at a time.
Soundscapes. So we're going to play for you some sounds from a coral reef, and then I want you to tell us what we're listening to. And you played sounds like this in your talk as well. And I remember the first time I kind of heard these with you, I was just so surprised that there was so much life that you could hear. I mean, I just don't associate sound with being under water.
No, I think that's exactly it. You've hit on the point that the first people say often. We get comments are like, what's the point? Fish don't have ears. But they do. You can't see them.
They look like yours, yeah.
Yeah. There's so much going on. So this rainforest analogy, I think, is brilliant in this case as well, because, in the rainforest, you have all these birds, the mammals, the insects that you can hear, and it's just exactly the same on a coral reef, but it's different. And of course, no one would ever have any reason to hear this normally. So most people, if they ever go onto a reef for the first time, maybe they're snorkeling or diving, it's so kind of mind-blowing. There's so much going on. You don't even notice. Yeah, you don't notice that there's all this sound.
Wow.
But if you take a moment, you maybe dive down and you hold onto a rock, not a coral or something, and you just stop and listen. The first thing you begin to hear is this kind of background crackle that's it's like a campfire in the rain. And then you realize how loud it actually is. And then if you listen for a bit longer, there's all these other sounds. So those kind of whooping sounds, grunting, pulses, knocking, that is mainly coming from the fish that we have on these reefs. And I'll be honest as well, most of these sounds, we don't know what species is making them and why. So it's totally a new area of science, but we're starting to learn a lot more about it now that we're putting microphones in the water and listening to these habitats.
So that's what I was going to ask you is, how do you listen to these sounds as a scientist?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple, really. We've got now low-cost recorders. We worked on developing some of these a few years ago called the Hydromorph. We can place these onto the reef and you can leave it recording for weeks at a time.
Wow.
And it's called passive acoustic monitoring. So it's a whole field and you just leave it there listening. And then we pull that up, you download the data, and that's actually where the tricky part starts. We've got all this data. So you can go through and listen to a small amount of it yourself, but this is where my work has come in, trying to automate some of this process.
Right. The dead reefs, the bleached reefs that you talked about, they're pretty silent.
That's it. So this is an emerging research topic, so we're still learning all about this. But, if a reef has bleached in the last few weeks, we might still have a lot of the other organisms that are there. They're still making those sounds. Sure. We could find that there is going to be a change in the soundscape. But over time, if that reef doesn't recover, if that reef dies, the soundscape is definitely going to be impacted.
Right.
So when the coral is bleached and it's still that ghostly white, that coral is alive. It's just on its last legs.
Right.
Wow.
So if the water's cool again and that algae can come back, the coral should recover and the reef will go back to normal.
So interesting.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. But as you said, you were leaving those devices down there for a really long time. And this is where we get to your talk, which I think is incredible, right? So tell us a little bit about how on earth AI, because everyone is talking about AI. What are you doing with AI when it comes to this work?
Yeah. So AI is one of those things that is really revolutionizing this field. And so it began where we collect all these recordings. We could collect weeks or months of audio on a single research expedition, and increasingly by sending them out to partners around the world. So we have all this audio that no one could ever possibly listen to all of it. And so we were looking for ways to automate the process of studying these sounds and learning what we can. And this began quite simply by kind of chucking the sounds of healthy reefs, just the raw recording, like that entire soundscape, at an AI model alongside those from degraded reefs. And we found that this model could actually do a pretty good job at identifying the difference between these. So if we gave it new recordings from a reef it hadn't heard before in where we were working in Indonesia, it could tell whether this came from a healthy or a degraded reef from just a minute of recording. We found we could apply this to challenges that mattered as well. So we work with Mars on that coral reef restoration program.
They are the backing, supporting this incredible restoration project that you're working on out in Indonesia.
Yeah, that's it. And around the world, actually.
Okay.
And it's, totally, when you mention this, people are confused. They've heard of Mars, but they think it's some other company or NGO. But this is Mars, who they own a whole load of brands. So pet foods are the biggest part of their business, Sheba being one of those. And they have been doing a phenomenal job. One of their kind of corporate responsibility projects in working on coral reef restoration.
I think one of the reasons I struggle with it in my head is I'm like, but cats don't like water.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
But
Cats like fish, though. I think that's the spin.
Okay.
How do cats feel about coral is the question. Yeah.
So anyway, this is a complete tangent, but I realize that that's why my brain trips up on it, because I'm like, but the cats don't like the water, but they do like the fish. Going back to this incredible technology, one question. Normally, before you bring in something like AI, do people just is it just like manually, like people listen to the recordings and then figure out what's going on?
Yeah, that's it. So I can link those two together. The first set of recordings I was involved in gathering were from Hope Reef, or before Hope was built, actually, at this restoration project in Indonesia, which Mars is supporting. And Tim, another mentor of mine, he spent many hours listening to the recordings, and it takes ages. If you want to listen to an hour of audio, it's probably going to take you all day to listen to it and count the different sounds, figure out what these are, because they're all new sounds. We don't hear it, like we would in bird bioacoustics and go, that's a goldfinch, or that's a robin. Right. We don't know what these are, so you have to find the sound for the first time, figure out what the different ones are, and then how often are we hearing these. So that was initially how it started.
Very
this kind
labor
of manual
intensive.
process.
Yeah.
That's tough. And you mentioned also building Hope Reef, which is where your work is based now. And how do you build a reef?
So I could never do it justice in one answer. So I would definitely, if you want to know more, look it up online. So buildingcoral.com is the website where it can tell you all about the process. But in a nutshell, you have this degraded reef that's destroyed. It's all kind of rubble that doesn't recover. It becomes ecologically trapped, as we call it, if we don't intervene, because the rubble's just loose. If a new coral settles on it, it turns in the waves and the tides. It doesn't have a way to grow back. So what you can do is you can put out, they call them these reef stars, with loads of corals attached to them, link them up, and they kind of secure the bottom habitat. And then the coral begins to grow. So it's given it this secure substrate to grow from. And they can carpet huge areas, several hundred square meters in a week. And after just a few years, it's stunning seeing how it's come back. You can swim over this and you kind of peek through. You can maybe see like these reef stars at the bottom peeking out, but they're really hard to see. And a few years later, it's gone. Okay,
so we're building these reefs, we're looking at this, but the data is overwhelming. So now we finally get to the AI. This feels, talk us through this rationale, because I think that then people are not immediately saying, yes, I love restoration, I'm into it, I'm listening to a coral reef, let me use AI.
Let me plug ChatGPT in. Yeah. I feel like people just know stuff about the capabilities of AI. Maybe I just need to do some research on AI, but tell us, like, how do you arrive at that conclusion?
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing. It's one of those messages I want to share is you think of ChatGPT or you think of image generation or something when AI is mentioned to you, but it's this tool we can use for so many different problems. So this project came about for myself. It was kind of serendipitous in that I was set to be working on a project. COVID happened, that completely fell through. And so I was looking at this other data set we had where my colleague had worked on it. He'd listened to all of these recordings in this really labor intensive process. And I'd actually worked on a similar problem in a previous coursework when I was an undergrad, where instead of coral reefs, we had human patients who had been diagnosed with heart disease or as healthy, and all these different measures from them. So like blood pressure, cholesterol levels, those kind of things. And we trained a very simple AI model to be able to diagnose new patients. And so I realized, actually, these problems aren't too dissimilar, but instead of patients, we have coral reefs, and instead of those kind of health measures, we've got acoustic recordings. So that's why I set about on this problem, and it worked really well the first time we gave it a go. And so we've been running with it from there and trying to build this field and try all the different kind of nooks and crannies we can explore here to make use of it.
That's such a good way of using AI, because there's also a big conversation at the moment about AI maybe being a bad thing or like using too much energy or something. But I feel like if you're using it for this, then that makes sense, right? Like that, maybe this is a good way rather than
absolutely
generating Studio Ghibli images. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's one of those technologies that is going to be completely pervasive. It's going to change the world we live in.
Right.
And it's trying to make sure some of that gets captured for good, not just for like you say, making fun images of you or your friends doing whatever. So that's what I'm hoping we'll see more and more of.
And so from this like your undergrad research and then repurposing that learning into this research and this work that you're doing now, was that you said that was like a pretty simple process and you just train the AI and it works and it worked the first time and it's carried on working. Have there been any surprises? Was there anything that you like came across that was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was going to happen, or we've discovered something completely new?
Yeah, well, I guess the process in itself was certainly completely new, but it's not without its challenges. So we do find this model that we trained there, it works at this one time, this one place. If we took it somewhere new, like the Great Barrier Reef from last year, it's going to fall head over heels. So these models don't transfer to new data sets.
Okay.
So we've been trying to work on approaches that can actually help us solve that problem. And so a big surprise in some research, this was where the time I spent with Google DeepMind came in, was we were trying to capture some of the learnings from other bioacoustic fields where they're far better studied. We found that if we actually trained a model on audio from birds, which we have millions of recordings of, people have been listening and documenting birds for like decades with recordings, right?
Bird watching.
People love bird watching.
That's it. And so we realized we could actually capture that and train our model on a huge abundance of bird data with a sprinkling in or a healthy dose of coral reef audio and optimize it for the coral reef challenge, but really building on the foundations that other bioacousticians have managed to achieve in this bigger field. So that was a real surprise and it worked really nicely.
And what, in terms of the restoration work, what this allows you to understand, right, is if it's working?
Yeah, that's it. So we want to understand if restoration is working. Are we bringing back what we would call a fully functioning ecosystem? So something that's comparable to a healthy reef, or something that's not quite there yet, or is different, that's re-emerging in a different way. And so we're still developing these fields, but we're finding we can hear indicators of many of the processes on these reefs in the soundscape that we want to see if they're recovering. And so we've been doing this in Indonesia, but also with a handful of partners around the tropics, restoring their coral reefs. So they can see, is their approach making a difference?
Right.
Can they evidence that? That's really important to a lot of these projects. They're trying to raise funds, or maybe they're a tourism operator and they want to show their customers that they are restoring the reefs. So that's how we're being able to use this tool to support coral reef restoration.
So, Ben, one of the things that we talked about a lot when we were working on your talk, just because I'm always interested in this and we were discussing it, is the role of local communities in your work. Because obviously we're sat here in East London.
Right.
The coral reef is not here.
Allegedly,
Allegedly. Yeah. And as you said, there are loads of local communities all around the world who depend on these reefs, but also have been stewards of these ecosystems for centuries, if not thousands of years. I'm curious to know, as a scientist from the UK, how do you work with both scientists and other local experts and people who live and whose livelihoods are on the reef in these kinds of projects?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's something I think science has improved on a lot over the last decade. I'm sure there's still a long way to go. Is this concept of parachute science, where Western scientist comes in, collects some data, flies back home, publishes paper, and there's no engagement there.
Right.
But that's where, with projects like this one, through listening to the reef, it's a really powerful way to engage many different layers and groups of people. So we're able to send recorders to people around the world who have this problem they want to solve. So in our case, a big bottleneck was being able to monitor reef restoration that lots of different projects have been implementing, because it's really costly and time consuming to restore a reef, let alone go and then do the impact reporting and the monitoring. So us as scientists sat here at University College London or anywhere else, we might be working on technologies that can help with some of these problems that these local groups are trying to solve. So by collaborating together, we can produce this new technique and test it out on their reefs, working with them, and then give them the results so they can report on that impact. And we've been doing that for restoration, but there's definitely other use cases where I think we want to start finding new partners who can benefit from this as well. And we're always open to people who have ideas and projects that could use this technology as well.
Right. So I think this brings us nicely to something you kind of mentioned at the end of your talk. We didn't have enough time to like really get into it, which is this problem of bomb fishing, which is something I hadn't heard of before. Will you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. So I guess firstly, bomb fishing, basically it is what it says on the tin. Yeah. So fishermen go out on the water and with these explosives, mostly made often of homemade components, throw them onto a shoal of fish, and it's a devastatingly fast way to kill all these fish, scoop them up. It's a very efficient way to catch and kill a lot of fish.
I do that in Breath of the Wild, the Zelda game, sorry, for context. Like it is a really efficient way of fishing.
Well, I'm glad you can relate firsthand.
Yeah. I wouldn't do it in real life. Important to mention.
Yeah. I haven't heard that application before, but yeah.
Like, what on earth?
What
are you doing on
I was thinking, we need to chat.
What are you doing on weekends?
I do that on the weekend.
Is that your climate confession?
No. Yeah, this week's climate confession.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it. And so it's a very quick and fast way to kill a lot of fish, but it also kills the habitat where they live, so the coral reefs. And this bombing will happen again and again over years and decades, and it will decimate that reef and reduce it to those rubble fields I mentioned earlier that fail to recover. And it's a big problem we did a review recently and found 20 countries in the world across the last 20 years it's been happening in, just from published literature. There's probably more out there. And in many of these, perhaps most, it's found that often there's a bit of a cost barrier. So often it's the more middle income or wealthier members of those communities can access the illegal supply chain to get the parts needed to make these. And often it's the more vulnerable community members who don't have the resources to this, who go out and use traditional fishing methods, who are then losing their livelihood because the reef is gone, the fish are gone. So it's impacting these people in lots of different ways.
Yeah, so it's like the most vulnerable parts of society are once again suffering.
Yeah.
It's one of those stories,
And are people, I mean, you might not know the answer to this, but the people who are doing it because they don't understand the impact of it, or do they know and they just don't care that they're destroying the reef?
It's really nuanced and it changes around the world, and you probably have to talk to everyone. But what we often hear is that people are aware of the damage it does, but often the sea is considered so large that, you know, the small impact you're having isn't going to add up. I mean, we all live like that, really, don't we? In many aspects of our life. It's like the last thing reefs need in the face of climate change is like people throwing bombs on them.
Yeah.
But this practice is illegal, right? Like, it's not that this is something totally fine. Like, what people are doing when they're fishing in this way is illegal.
Yeah, that's it. It's illegal in every country, and it happens in loads of places, but a blind eye is turned to it, or often there's just no way to document where it happens and how often. It's just rumors and things being passed around communities and groups, so we can't know where it's a big issue, if some kind of focus or attention is needed, and often that makes it easy to turn a blind eye when there are other problems in an area as well. Right,
because it's like, how vast is the ocean? How are you going to detect it? So I'm curious to know then, how does all of this play into your work? Yeah, so this was another one of those where it came about once we developed this first approach using AI. It seemed so obvious that this had to be the next thing we wanted to take on, because I've heard it firsthand in the water. So you'll be on your dive or your snorkel and you'll hear the bomb go off, and it can be so loud it shakes you out your skin, but you put your head up on the surface and you can't even see the boat that's responsible. And that's because sound travels so far underwater. Yeah. So it travels 4.3 times faster underwater, meaning it goes great distances. So we can hear these bombs probably as far as 50 kilometers away. So similar technology has been used for poaching, for gunshot detection, where in a rainforest, you might be lucky if you can hear a gunshot go off a kilometer away. But we can hear this over a huge distance. So it made us realize, well, why don't we start looking at the data we have in these audio and start putting down recorders deliberately to start seeing how much bomb fishing that was happening. So in one area in the Indo-Pacific, we worked with some partners. We can't reveal who they are at this stage, but hopefully in the future, they'll get the credit they deserve. And we found from a single recorder, using the AI model I helped build for the team, they detected and then verified, listening to the results, over 4,600 instances of bomb fishing.
4,600?
That's it. And that's from one recorder in 6 months.
Oh,
so it's scary numbers.
That's a lot.
So you've become the bomb fishing police accidentally.
Detectives.
You didn't, detectives,
We're
not
still
police.
the detectives at this stage.
That's
and so
crazy.
I really hope this can be a tool that either us or others can start developing and using elsewhere to solve that first problem that I mentioned, where we can find out, well, where is this happening? You know, in a nation's waters, where are the hotspots? Where are the problems?
Yeah.
How much does it happen? And then if interventions are put in place, so that will need a combination of enforcement, but also the social aspects. So alternative livelihoods and awareness campaigns that will allow people to move away from this practice sustainably. Can we then measure the reductions that hopefully those interventions can have? And one day, I hope, report some positive numbers or negative numbers, I guess, in terms of bomb fishing happening. That's the one. But hopefully we can use this combination of technology and that social intervention hand in hand to solve the issue.
I think that's really cool. And I guess I really love the idea that you kind of have gone on this journey from, you know, in all of these different ways. And I'm just curious to know, like, so bomb fishing is obviously one of the things that you're looking at now in your lab and with your, you know, collaborators. Are there other kind of places you're hoping to go in the future with this work?
Yeah, well, how long have you got?
Yeah.
There's me personally, a number of directions, especially this bomb fishing angle. We're also looking at how we can produce these giant digital twins, we call them, of habitats.
Tell us about these.
So these are stunning. I've got a friend we're working on this called Sergi. If you look up Wildflow, you'll find his website, and he's got these stunning models of this enormous reef area where you go on the reef, you collect a ton of pictures, and you can produce this giant 3D model. And then one of the master students in Indonesia we worked with just published her lead author paper, so shout out to Rinda, showing that we can use these models to track restoration progress, so on that same system. So that's another angle.
You're going to have to explain, though, to Ben, what is a digital twin?
Oh, do you already know what it is? Damn, it's just me. It's just me and you guys listening. What is a digital twin?
Yeah, it's so easy to reel off all the jargon, isn't it? But it's like this giant 3D model. So I guess you could have it in, you know, in Zelda or whatever game that you can look around on, you can explore. It's a photorealistic 3D twin of the reef. And often the digital twin, if you want to be really technical, it will have some live component to it as well. Maybe data coming in from the field. I hope we can get there, maybe with acoustics soon as well. So that's one area another one I'm really interested in looking at. And then there's colleagues doing loads of amazing stuff. So here at UCL, there's a huge project called the Biome Health Project, where researchers have been working with groups across the Masai Mara in Kenya, in Borneo, in Nepal, to look at the impact of national parks and conservation zones. And the communities, again, they're living with those. So those that live within each of these, and using camera traps and AI, so these camera traps, an animal walks in front of them and takes a picture nice and easy. We collect millions of images, so AI can help us study those and finding amazing findings like what's the impact of cattle grazing versus sheep and goat grazing in Kenya, for example. All kind of research questions that often tie back into climate change, into human health. That's where a lot of my colleagues are working as well. So it's like just this nexus of things that can be studied. I do have
one question, because we're at the UCL East. So we tell us about the bats very quickly.
There's a lot of bat stuff. So my lead supervisor for my PhD, Kate, kind of cut her teeth on bats. So I think she is.
We might have to have Bat Woman on.
She's definitely worth it. And Kate seems to know everything about everything when it comes to the environment and human health. So would recommend. But we've got recorders out on the Olympic Park where our office is based, listening out for bat activity. And it's a great way to kind of test new technology that's being developed. And they're looking at the impact, the West Ham Stadium here. How does that change bat activity when there's a game going on? AI is helping find the bats in those recordings and see what's happening. So lots of crazy stuff.
So interesting. This is like, I rewatched Black Panther the other day, and it's like, that bit where they have the model of the cars when they're trying to do the mission. Anyway, but it sounds like that. It sounds like Wakanda in the sea.
I know exactly the bit. That's where we want to get to. We're working.
Brilliant. Is there anything else that you think we should be listing or people should be looking into if they're interested in any of this work?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question because people want to do so much all the time, which is amazing. And we can all only do so much individually. And I think often it's easy to pin environmental or climate challenges onto the individual, which is not right. We can all play our part. We can all make a difference. So people are probably well aware of the changes they can make. But directly, if you want to learn more about coral reefs, there's my talk online. Please check it out.
Yes, definitely. Number one.
There's buildingcoral.com is that website. There's a project called Calling in Our Corals, which is another collab with Google, where you can learn all about coral reef sound and then contribute some data yourself. So it's a citizen science project where you listen to recordings and help us find new sounds within those.
That is
We love citizen science.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And then also, I always like to say, younger listeners or someone looking for a change as well, I think, I'm a big believer that one of the differences you can make is choosing what you do with your career and where you're going. So maybe that's research like me, or you want to get into the policy aspects, or sorting out the supply chain side in some business or industry you work with. So you can make such a difference by all that years of life you dedicate working. If you can turn that onto something useful, I think that's where a big change can be made as well.
Yeah. Great advice. You can be the next Batman. It's not what you were saying, actually. Yeah, maybe cut that bit out.
Thank you so much for joining us and for letting us kind of get in and pick it and ask all the questions we wanted to ask about your work. We could have gone. I mean, we could do maybe we will do like a whole episode just on the AI side of things, because I feel like there's so much cool stuff around how you made these models. So maybe we'll come back and do that. But thank you for telling us about your work and for hosting us here.
Yeah, thank you both. It's been amazing to have you and get this chance to talk about it more. I'm always here. So yeah, reach out.
We'll come back to visit
I'm going to have some recordings for you soon. So be prepared.
Can't wait.
Remember, stay curious.
Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure that you get next week's releases.
And why not reach out with your very own climate confessions?
While you're at it, please leave a rating and a review.
Now, let's shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
Executive produced by Josie Colter.
Produced by Ben Beheshty.
Music also by Ben Beheshty.
Communications by Tara Cooper and Issey Gladston.
Curation by Deesha Chandra.
Hosted by Ben Hurst.
And Maryam Pasha.
And remember,
stay curious.